All right. And we're live. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, welcome, folks, to Nature Nova Scotia's celebration of nature. This is our 31st year, and we're very happy to be doing it virtually for the first time. I guess we'll see how it works. For those of you that are tuned in, there is a poll that you could take if you'd like, just about where you're coming from. We have 15 groups now around the province, from Cape Breton right down to Tuscot River. So it's interesting to see how many folks are tuning in. And so if you could do that, that'd be great. This annual celebration is something that this year we have an urban nature theme. It was going to be last year, but it's very fitting to be doing that, I think. And especially for people that are in urban settings, nature to me is an antidote for COVID-19. It's just a wonderful way to almost spend moments without any fear or anything else. It's in that regard, you can focus and forget for a little bit about some of the things that may be bothering you. And certainly being social is a bit of a challenge. As I said, we've been around for 31 years now. We normally would be having a 2-hour session, perhaps with a speaker. We're lucky to have Graham from Nature Canada, but we'd be passing wine and cheese around and enjoying things a little more and seeing people we hadn't seen in person for a long time. So I think it's going to be one heck of a celebration when we finally get finished with COVID and we can all do this again. We're very active. If you don't know too much about us, I highly recommend that you go to Facebook, that you take a look at what Becky's doing there. The person you're probably seeing right now, Rebecca Parker, is our part-time person. She's made a world of difference to the group, and we've got a lot of activists, I should say, and certainly if you're interested in doing something for nature, I would recommend going to our website or going to our Facebook group and learning about one of the groups that's near you. And if you're young and you're watching, the Young Naturalists are part of this. And looking at people like me, you begin to realize you've got to have younger people involved. So I think that it's really important to do that. Now, I do have a couple of other things I could say about what we've been doing, just in case you're interested. And Becky, why don't you wave at me? I'm not counting the 10 minutes. But in the past year, we've consulted with a lot of people in the western part of Nova Scotia, because the public land down there that's been protected from cutting for in a moose area for at least 40 years is being actively cut. And there was a blockade there that the Extinction Rebellion people put up, and quite frankly, we went down and tried to help, and we consulted with First Nations and came up with our own maps, very good GIS material. We gave it to the government and said, please stop, and they didn't. So we had 38,000 people that signed a petition, and they didn't. And we're asking currently right now, I've written about 4 letters to the Premier and the Minister of of Lands and Forestry, they call it now, at least they're being honest with the forestry, asking that we stop clear cutting, because we're supposed to be doing ecological forestry, and they haven't. And they're cutting right now during the time when migratory birds are breeding. So one of the big problems here in Nova Scotia, if you care about nature, is that the management authority for public lands has been handed over to the forest industry with no oversight by government. And that's keeping a lot of us busy. The other thing we've done this year, some of us have been involved, me personally, and the Eastern Shore Forest Watch Association, and with the support of other groups, is take the government to court over Owl's Head. And of course, we did that successfully with the Species at Risk Act, because they weren't enforcing their own laws. So with Owl's Head, we've got 23,000 signatures now in a week and a half. And we funded these through public donations, both private donations and crowdfunding. And we have other cases in the works. And the biodiversity bill was recently squashed by industry coming up with a fake concerned private landowners group. So there's lots of things to be concerned about if you like nature, but there's lots of things we can do. And I think at that, probably I should just say thank you for joining us. This is not going to be the normal social event, but we're very fortunate to have Graham here and Burkhard Plack, who's the head of the Halifax Field Naturalists, to welcome you. And I'll turn it back to Becky.
Thanks, Bob. So I'll just end our poll there. It looks like we've got a lot of folks from HRM, a lot of folks from Minneapolis Valley, which is not surprising knowing our membership, a lot of folks from there. But we've also got folks from the South Shore, North Shore, Eastern Shore, Cape Breton, and even a couple outside of Atlantic Canada. So
hey.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Yeah, so with that, we'll turn the virtual floor here over to Graham. So Graham Saul, if folks aren't familiar with him, the executive director at Nature Nova Scotia. And Graham, I think you've been there since 2017, maybe what I read a while ago. And you have a political science background, if I'm not mistaken, and you've been around almost as long as Bob has in social and environmental justice issues. So Graham was a founding member of Ecology Ottawa. He's also worked in Mozambique, Washington, D.C., and a bunch of other cool places with Friends of the Earth Canada, Oil Change International, and Climate Action Network. And we're really lucky to have you tonight, Graham. So go ahead.
Bob?
I was just going to say, could we let Burkhard say a couple of words first?
Oh, yes, Burkhard, I'm sorry. You were actually going to open the floor today. Burkhard is our Halifax Field Naturalist president. Burkhard, do you want to tell us maybe a bit about the group and how this event normally runs with a regional host?
Yes, 2 years ago, we were asked by Nature Nova Scotia if, together with the young naturalists, we would like to host the event. And after asking in our organization, we had roughly 10 very enthusiastic people who were saying, yes, we are going to organize this. And when thinking about what can we show, we were eager to show people from outside Halifax what we have near the city. And in a sense, it was very sad when it was canceled, but in a sense, it really brings home that nature near the city is so important, and we've seen it over the last year. You don't want to travel, you want to get out, and it's still the case. And unfortunately, we cannot have you participants here, but maybe next year we can show you what we have in Halifax, around Halifax, and can welcome you. So that's what we were trying to do. For those of you who don't know, as a field naturalist, we've been around for close to 50 years now, not quite yet, but we're getting there. And we like our city, we like what is around us, and we will welcome you next time. Okay, well, that's it from me, and over to you, Becky.
Thank you, Burkhard. And we should say thank you to all of our volunteers who planned this 2 years in a row, I guess. Yeah, twice. Yeah, so we have a really exciting lineup for this weekend. So Graham's going to start us off with some federal context, and then we're going to take a shift over to some more local topics, some that are more Halifax related and some that are definitely province-wide in scope. So yeah, so if you're not familiar with Halifax Field Naturalists, definitely a great group to get involved with if you're in the HRM or just in general. We'll be sharing some social media links over the event too. So if you are new, you can find out who all these folks are. Graham, you can take it away.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Becky. Excuse me. And thank you, Bob and Burkhard, for your words there. And I also want to begin by saying thank you to Nature Nova Scotia for all the great work you do. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ways we intersect with you, but it's been a real pleasure working with groups in Nova Scotia and with Nature Nova Scotia in particular. My name, as Becky mentioned, is Graham Saul. I am the Executive Director of Nature Canada. I'm coming to you today from Ottawa, the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Yeah, Nature Canada is an 80-year-old organization. And we've gone through various iterations over the years, but at one stage, we were called the Canadian Nature Federation. And that's a reflection of the fact that we were and are the national manifestation of a network of naturalist organizations and nature groups across the country. I like to say that I think the nature community is the largest arm of the environmental community as a whole, because no matter where you go, you find this fabulous ecosystem of organizations, you know, the birders and the botanists and the canoe and kayak clubs, the land trail, the trail associations and the land trusts and the wildlife centers. There's this fabulous ecosystem of organizations across the country that make up the nature community. And as you'll hear a little bit more from my presentation, Nature Canada makes a real effort to work with and support our partner organizations closer to the ground, and Nature Nova Scotia, like Ontario Nature and Nature Quebec and BC Nature and Nature New Brunswick, really are the go-to kind of provincial affiliates for our organization, even though we're all independent organizations legally. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a bit of a presentation I'd like to walk you through, tell you a little bit more about Nature Canada, where we're at as an organization, and walk through some of the things that are really driving federal policy at this stage that have implications for Nova Scotia, as well as tell you a little bit about some of our programs. So this should be working. If you can see a big, beautiful dragonfly that says Nature Canada, Nature Nova Scotia, May 28th, 2021. This time of year, as the bugs begin to pick up, I'm particularly reminded of how much I love the dragonflies. And I love walking through a forest, and there's actually been some research that shows that you're not just imagining things. Dragonflies know that when larger mammals are moving through the forest, we're essentially kicking up bugs. So they sort of ride shotgun with you as you move through and pick off many of the smaller insects and black flies and other bugs that that are coming for you. So I have a particular love for the dragonfly as a hiker. As I said, Nature Canada is an 80-year-old organization. Our mission is to work with others to discover, defend, and restore nature. I want to talk a little bit about what each one of those means to us. Discover is really an acknowledgement that as a nature organization and a manifestation of naturalist groups across the country, really at the core of our organization and our supporter base and our people is a love of getting out into nature. And it's kind of a combination in my mind of the naturalist who really enjoys discovering the scientific details and the taxonomy and so much about develop such important knowledge about the details of nature. But then there's also just the nature lover who likes to move through space in terms of on hiking or take their family out into nature. So Nature Canada tries to do everything we can to help our supporter base discover nature in what any way is most appropriate to them. But then we're also conscious that there's a real problem going on in the world. And Canada is actually a very blessed country from the perspective of the sheer amount of nature we have in us. I think we have about 20% of the world's fresh water, about 24% of the world's wetlands, about 28% of the world's remaining boreal forests. We have by far the longest coastline in the world. And Nature Canada works to, as much as possible, defend intact ecosystems from being further degraded. We know that right now the world is unfortunately in the midst of an unprecedented species collapse. at least in recent millions of years. And we need to do whatever we can to ensure that intact ecosystems, which are disproportionately important to the survival of species, are defended. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But then there's also kind of a reality, which is that in large parts of Canada, we've essentially already gone too far. That human habitat, it's overwhelmingly habitat destruction, but you can see from this heat map that there's a very strong correlation between human presence and the prevalence of species at risk. And we have to begin to develop a visionary outlook, which calls for not just protecting what we have, but proactively restoring life's abundance. And so that is also one of our core dimensions of our work. So those are, broadly speaking, some of our goals, and our tools we describe as the Nature Nation, the Nature Network, and Nature Policy. Nature Nation is really 250,000 individual supporters and social media followers across the country that we work with in terms of our mission of discovering, defending, and restoring nature. It's a community of nature lovers that is Nature Canada. The Nature Network is, as I mentioned earlier, there's this fabulous ecosystem of organizations across the country. And we have, in fact, the largest team in our organization is our Nature Network team. We've got 8 full-time staff that are pretty much focused on working with groups that we have organized in a custom-built database, about 900 organizations across the country that we're in wide variety of contact with, everything from very little, if any, to the kind of ongoing day-to-day working relationship that we have with Nature Nova Scotia. And our goal really is to support these local groups, to do everything we can to provide money and resources and training, and then also to create a community of organizations and to try to build our muscles in terms of our capacity to work together and mobilize together to address some of the many nature challenges that we're facing in Canada. So as I said here, the Nature Network is 900 organizations across the country. And then we have Nature Policy, which is, at the end of the day, Nature Canada is overwhelmingly based in Ottawa. We have teams that are focused on engaging the federal government around a wide variety of nature-related issues. Our programs, some of which I'll get into in more detail, are Naturehood, which is really about getting kids and families into nearby nature. Bird-friendly cities and safe bird lives, which you can infer from the title. Work to Grow, which is a new jobs program for youth seeking employment that I'll talk a little bit about. And then from the perspective of kind of federal advocacy, protected areas, nature-based climate solutions, reforestation and the 2 Billion Tree Initiative, environmental law. And then we have, we're the host of the Green Budget Coalition, which is a coalition of about 30 organizations that work together to try to ensure that the federal budget is as environmentally oriented as possible. And then we also have a Women for Nature program. Before I get into some of the specific federal policy issues we're tracking or our programs, I do want to emphasize that as an organization, we have a growing emphasis on reconciliation and Indigenous-led conservation, as well as better engaging racialized communities across all of our work. There are aspects of the goals that Canada has set that we simply cannot achieve without taking reconciliation, Indigenous rights, and Indigenous-led conservation as a priority. Furthermore, we have a historic responsibility to take reconciliation seriously and to address it. And finally, I would say that in many ways, Indigenous-led conservation is some of the most exciting stuff happening in the conservation world right now. And we have a phenomenal amount to learn from some of the work that's being done there. And racialized communities, really, it's a reflection of the fact that the Canadian, we're so proud of all of our members and all of our supporters, but Nature Canada, and to a large degree, the nature community as a whole, has historically not done a good enough job of engaging the full diversity of Canada's population. And that is that's a failure on a variety of levels that we're trying to address. So with that in mind, Nature Canada has developed a commitment to equity and anti-racism. And it involves working at a variety of different levels. At a governance level, we have things like training for board members, or the adoption of statements of principles around our anti-racism or Indigenous rights and reconciliation principles. We also have a commitment from the board of directors to work towards being at least 50% BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and at least 50% women. And I think we'll be able to achieve that hopefully by the end of this year. We have a variety of conversations emerging around how we reassess the internal policies and staffing. And as you'll see, a number of our programs and partnerships are geared towards Indigenous-led conservation and better engaging racialized communities. And then there's some broader organizational culture work we're doing that is important to the organization, because we don't really see our work around equity and anti-racism as being focused on individual projects, but rather developing a practice and a culture within the organization. Some examples of this are, we are about to launch what we're calling Work to Grow, which in partnership with Parks Canada, will be funding 275 job opportunities for youth, Black, Indigenous, and racialized youth in the conservation and naturalist sector. We'll be able to match half the wages of the program over 8 to 16 weeks. And I do hope that some of the Nature Nova Scotia member organizations may be able to avail themselves of this program. And we're very interested in having a conversation about how we can help with youth employment. We've also just completed a strategic assessment of our commitment to nature and to reconciliation and Indigenous rights. Basically, what we've done is we've created a framework for assessing the degree to which we're systematically engaging. We're systematically addressing a series of questions within the context of our programs that are relevant to our relationship with Indigenous peoples and our approach to reconciliation and Indigenous-led conservation. That's creating sort of a baseline for us in terms of our understanding of where we're at, that we can use and work towards to improve. And we're also really hoping to have a conversation with our partner organizations across the country about this framework and how the way in which it's helping us assess our efforts to better support Indigenous-led conservation and advance reconciliation. Naturehood is one of our core programs, and it's really about getting kids and families into nearby nature. We heard earlier the importance of the ability to access green space during the pandemic, and that's certainly been our experience. And the program is supported by the Government of Canada. In many ways, it's focused on children and families, working with local nature groups who run programs that get children into migratory bird sanctuaries and national wildlife areas. But we are also doing our best to bring on new partners that are increasingly focused on racialized communities, and to work with our existing partners about how we're making sure that we're diversifying our outreach and better engaging a wider range of Canadians. We're very proud of the fact that we're a long-term supporter with our Naturehood program with the Young Naturalists Club, who we love. And we've recently started working with Flying Squirrel Adventures in Nova Scotia as well, and who offer free public outdoor programs in Kentville around the migratory bird sanctuary and local ravines. And they partner with community-based organizations to deliver programming to under-resourced communities and address access barriers. within the context of our efforts to advance our Naturehood program and better engage racialized communities, we've also just completed a needs assessment where we had 2 consultants in Toronto that did a variety of focus groups with youth from racialized communities about their attitudes towards nature, the challenges they face in accessing nature. And we've just come out with that report, which we're also hoping to use as an opportunity to not only reflect on the recommendations and how we can do better internally, but also to engage our many partner organizations within the Naturehood program and beyond. We had a webinar with the Sustainability Network on this report 2 days ago, where the authors presented it and had over 500 individuals from environmental organizations register for that. One of the areas where we're working with Nature Nova Scotia and some of the partners, or some of the member organizations and other groups in Nova Scotia, is with the Bird Friendly City program. Basically, this is a certification program. We've created a set of criteria which address the main threats associated with birds, and a set of actions and criteria upon which you would assess whether or not a city is beginning to move in the right direction in terms of being bird friendly. And there are 3 levels that a city can move through. And our goal is to get 30 cities registered as bird friendly cities by World Migratory Bird Day 2022. So we hope we can work with groups in Nova Scotia about moving that forward. We are already working with Bird Friendly Cities Halifax, led by a bird team which features partners from Nature Canada's Keep Cats Safe and Save Bird Lives program. We're interested in continuing these efforts made during the Cats and Birds program, and they're working to increase their membership. We've also been working with the Nova Scotia Bird Society, the Young Naturalist Club, Ecology Action Centre, among others in Nova Scotia on this issue in recent years. Protected areas is perhaps one of the most important things that's happening nationally, and I would argue regionally as well, from the perspective of addressing the broader environmental crisis that we are facing. As it pertains to species collapse. The federal government has made a commitment to expand protected areas to 25% of Canada's land, freshwater, and oceans by 2025 and 30% by 2030. In some ways, this is really the only federal nature-related commitment that we have that is commensurate with the sheer scale of the challenge that we are facing in trying to protect, in trying to reverse species collapse and protect Canada. Going from where we are right now, which is about 12% of land and fresh water and 14% of oceans, to 30%, terrestrially alone in terms of land protection, it's the equivalent of protecting an area the size of Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan combined. So this is a really big commitment. And in many ways, if we were able to work together at a provincial level and at a territorial level and at a national level to achieve this goal, it would be the kind of legacy that we could be really proud of accomplishing over the next decade. It would also help us advance our reconciliation goals, because there's absolutely no way to make this kind of progress without putting real resources behind Indigenous protected and conserved areas and guardians programs, and really supporting Indigenous-led protected areas. We're also thinking actively about the government's new blue economy agenda, which we want to make sure doesn't leave behind or minimize the conservation goals within the ocean protection, with the need in terms of ocean protection. And we're hoping that there's a real opportunity to make progress in terms of US-Canada cross-border collaboration. And, you know, the great eastern forests that run Nova Scotia, New Brunswick into Maine and beyond is a perfect example of how nature knows no boundaries, much like the whale and other aquatic species that move between our 2 countries. With relation to protected areas in Nova Scotia, we've been working actively with Nature Nova Scotia on these issues, who've attended some of our Nature on the Hill days in terms of engaging members of Parliament. We're quite aware of the great work that's being done in terms of the Eastern Shore Forest Watch Association and others around Owl's Head Provincial Park campaign, and doing some work with Ecology Action Center, Friends of Pugwash Estuary, and others. I want to also talk a little bit about nature-based climate solutions, because within the nature community, I think there's a growing recognition that climate change is an issue that needs to be addressed, and that we as a species, as a planet, we're really facing twin crises of climate change and species collapse. And I think it's really to our mutual benefit that we increasingly see it that way. And it's exciting that for the first time in history, nature-based climate solutions are now a core component of Canada's commitment to fighting climate change. So this is actually a graph that is from the government's own climate change plan. And you can see that the government is beginning to think in an integrated way. We saw commitments to nature-based climate solutions in the federal government's election platform, in the throne speech, in the mandate letters, in the fiscal update. We saw about $4 billion of investments in the fiscal update in the fall, and I forgot to mention another major breakthrough in terms of $3 billion of investments for nature in the most recent budget. And the government is beginning to think about how to advance its climate change goals within the context of making major investments in nature, which is an exciting development, I think, for a number of different reasons. I would argue that nature lovers need action on climate change. It's quite clear that right now the primary driver of species collapse in Canada and around the world is not climate change, right? It's habitat destruction. But it will be impossible for us to reverse species collapse and restore the natural world if we're having to deal with both the crises of habitat destruction and climate change. So we need the 2020s to be a breakthrough decade for action on climate change, because it's just going to get hard. It's just going to be more and more impactful in terms of its impact on species. But it works both ways as well, because without the help of the nature community, the climate change movement is going to struggle to create the kind of broad-based demand for action that we need in order to see the kind of progress that we need to see over the next decade. So, as I said earlier, the nature community is in many ways the largest arm of the broader environmental movement. We have intimate knowledge of our landscapes. We're already doing the work. We engage millions of Canadians, many of which are not primarily motivated by the obvious need to phase out fossil fuels and ramp up renewable energy. So if we throw our support behind the climate change movement, we can play a decisive role in creating the public demand that we all need to get the job done. And because of recent federal investments, because of the focus on nature-based climate solutions in terms of tree restoration and other approaches, because of the investments that are being made in this expansion of protected areas, we have an opportunity to increasingly, and your local governments and your provincial governments have an opportunity to increasingly access federal resources that can be used to advance the kinds of things that nature lovers care most about, while simultaneously being part of the solution to climate change. So it's really a win-win scenario. And we're, for instance, doing work with groups across the country right now. And our core message is, like, if your municipality, if your county, if your province, if it has a climate change strategy, then it should also have a nature-based climate change strategy. And this is an opportunity for nature lovers to become much more engaged. The good news is the Canadians really care about nature-based climate solutions and really care about climate change. Support for nature-based climate solutions in a recent poll of 1.2 million people around the world was actually higher in Canada than in any other country with high carbon emissions from land use. And it's especially high among young people. So nature-based climate solutions are a way for the nature community to increasingly engage around some of the issues that are really driving the interests of young people in Canada. In a recent eco-analytics poll, 95% of Canadians said protecting and restoring nature is a very important solution as it pertains to climate change. 70% said nature-based climate solutions are very important. And this support cuts across all the political spectrum and is especially high among women. I mean, there is an opportunity to engage people across the political spectrum around nature-based climate solutions that some of those folks will actually be much more hesitant around the clean energy transition. And so there's a way for us to talk to people about climate change through the lens of nature-based climate solutions that can also help broaden the importance and the demand for action on climate change. So we are working to basically right now build support for nature-based climate solutions across the country. We're doing public opinion research and surveys to help us better understand if people know what nature-based climate solutions are in terms of investing in nature restoration and nature protection to enhance the ability of nature to store carbon or to avoid carbon release, and to help us address nature protection goals while also helping to deal with some of the severe weather and other impacts associated with climate change. We're currently conducting online focus groups, as I mentioned. We need to find the best way to talk to Canadians about this and move them from support to understanding to action. And we'll be engaging a fair amount in online communications, and would really look forward to working more closely with Nova Scotia groups around nature-based climate solutions. We do run workshops on the issues, and if there's any groups are interested in having a deeper conversation about nature-based climate solutions, we would like to hear from you. We're also working on the 2 billion tree initiative. The government has made a decision, announced an investment of $3 billion over 10 years to plant 2 billion trees. And our goal is to work with organizations and national, or both at a local level and national, to ensure that this program is focused on restoration of ecosystems and biodiversity and climate change outcomes, as opposed to basically being directly or indirectly a subsidy to the logging industry. And we're saying we need this program to be restoration focused. It needs to be about planting the right trees in the right places for the right reasons. But the good news is there's a significant amount of resources available at the federal level for your municipality, for your county, for your province, for your local organization, and for Indigenous communities to play a proactive role in planting the trees and getting involved, and also to insist that your governments get involved and have a plan that is focused on restoration and focused on the right trees in the right places for the right reasons. And if you're a local group interested in restoration and trees can play a role, we're very interested in hearing from you. There are a variety of other kinds of opportunities emerging at the federal level. The federal government is about to begin a process of developing a federal adaptation strategy. There's a lot of conversation going on about the role of forests and logging in contributing to or addressing climate change. Multi-species action plans are being developed where the federal government is trying to move from a species by species approach to species at risk, and look at landscapes where interventions in the landscape can address the needs of multiple endangered species simultaneously. And I do believe there is one of their priority areas in Nova Scotia. Of course, natural infrastructure is always a question, and we are moving towards hopefully a new iteration of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which will hopefully set the tone for a ambitious agenda globally for the over the next decade. We have been working with Nova Scotia partners on this. We know that some partners have submitted some partners have submitted. Oh, sorry. So when it comes to nature-based climate solutions, we were actually planning on doing a bit of a deep dive in a specific area with Nature Nova Scotia, and did submit a proposal to the federal government for funding with them and 7 other groups across the country that unfortunately was not funded. We are working with Ecology Action Center, who is leading on a eelgrass project that we're hopefully going to be supporting, which is how do you think about nature-based climate solutions from an oceans perspective. And as I said earlier, we definitely like to explore ways to work with Nova Scotia groups and member organizations on nature-based climate solutions and 2 billion trees. Our 2 billion tree outreach has begun in Nova Scotia. Bob introduced us to Nova Scotia Salmon Association, which is, we understand, put in a request for information to the 2 billion tree program. We've also been in contact with Pugwash Estuary, municipality, County of Cumberland, Wild Outside, and others. And we're really trying to both work at a federal level from a top-down perspective to make sure that the federal policy is as restoration oriented as possible as it rolls out this initiative, but then also to work with groups across the country to make sure that people are taking advantage of these opportunities and insisting that their local governments do as well. Finally, we have been doing a little bit of environmental law work more recently with Mark Butler, who is the former executive director of Ecology Action Center and is now a senior advisor to Nature Canada. And he's leading up our work around the Canadian Environmental Protection Act review. The government of Canada is in the process of reviewing the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And Mark has been at the forefront of trying to draw attention to the fact that this is actually the place where genetically engineered animals are regulated. Canada's approach to genetically engineered animals, and Canada is actually one of the first countries to allow genetically engineered animals into the food chain with a salmon in Atlantic Canada. And so we've been bringing together Indigenous peoples and scientists, anglers, and conservationists to develop recommended changes to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to keep wild species wild. And we're going to continue to. They recently announced that they will be engaging in a broader review on this question in the coming months and years. So I will stop there. Very happy to explore any dimension of anything I just mentioned, answer any questions related to anything else about the work of Nature Canada or some of the things that are happening at a federal level. And just wanted to end by saying, you know, at the end of the day, the strength of the nature community, the strength of our ability to make progress on the issues that we've identified that are global and national and local and regional in scope. It really is, I just want to emphasize, it's the hundreds of local nature groups across the country, people that get up every day to appreciate nature and learn about it, but then also to work to defend and restore it, that are the heartbeat of the nature community. And we are doing everything we can to try to be a good partner to local nature groups. And we want to thank you for your leadership, because if the federal government is not, if members of parliament are not hearing from constituencies in their ridings, if they don't see the kind of activity that you do on a day-to-day basis, it's going to be impossible for us to drive forward the kind of change that we need, which will then come back and support local groups on the ground. So thank you, Nature Nova Scotia, and all of your members for your leadership.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, folks, if you have questions, thoughts for Graham, go ahead and stick them in the chat there, or you can raise your hand and we can bring you in to speak if you'd rather ask your questions that way. I can start us off, I guess, or Bob or Burkhard, if you guys have questions, thoughts too, feel free to pipe up. I was wondering, Graham, if you could elaborate a bit on what you've heard about folks' plans around the tree program in other parts of Canada. 'Cause I know that's something when it first opened up here, when Bob and I discussed it, we're both a little bit like, well, tree planting in Nova Scotia, we need so many other more things here. So we were kind of thinking about, what would a program like that look like out here? And yeah, so I'm curious about what you're hearing from other areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big range of responses. We have, for instance, we're in contact with an Indigenous community in British Columbia whose forest has been degraded for a variety of different reasons, beetles and forest fires and other things. And they are working to restore those forests for the purpose of restoring grizzly habitat. We're in contact with a wide range of conservation authorities that are engaged in planting large numbers of trees from the perspective of building up natural infrastructure in the watersheds that they're responsible for. We have been in contact with a wide range of municipalities who are thinking about how to take advantage of the program, and of course nature groups that are planting trees at a local level. The threshold that they're initially setting is they're looking for groups that kind of have a record of planting 5,000 trees or more every year. 2 billion trees is a lot of trees. And at a federal level, the battle is really to make sure that this is a program that is as focused on restoration, as I said earlier, as possible, the right trees in the right places for the right reasons. But the only way we're going to make that happen is if we also have partners on the ground engaging their municipalities who will hopefully take advantage of these programs. I mean, there may be nature groups, some of which I know are in Nova Scotia, who will see opportunities to plant thousands of trees and can access the resources that this program is making available. But in many ways, the best thing that we can do is also make sure that our municipalities are aware of it and that our municipalities are approaching it from a restoration perspective. So it's an opportunity to shape the landscape within your geography, as opposed to needing to necessarily create the organizational infrastructure and prioritize the planting of thousands of trees. And I do think that local nature groups are in many ways best placed to know where there's need for interventions from a restoration perspective and where trees can make a difference from the perspective of the strength of ecosystems in nature. And so bringing that knowledge to your municipality, trying to act as a bridge between the program and the municipality to make sure that happens is, I think, it's a real opportunity to get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of trees in the ground that might not otherwise be there.
That's a good thought for our attendees here today, who are from all over Nova Scotia. And tree planting is a very broad thing. So if there is an area in your local community where you could really use some strategic planting, anything from windbreaks to particular species, then reaching out to your municipality would be a really great thing to do. And if you're looking for help there, we are a network of natural history societies, so we can put you in touch. So reach out if tree planting is something that you're thinking about.
Yeah, and woodlot owners are also another avenue into this. So I know that there's a strong woodlot owners association in many provinces, and Nova Scotia included, and so there may also be opportunities to get that woodlot association involved in thinking about how it can help distribute opportunities across landowners.
Are you hearing about plans from woodlot associations in other places, Graham? That's something else we were kind of wondering about here. I know when I think about my own woodlot, I'm going to have to replace a lot of ash in the next 50 years. So
yeah,
that's something we hadn't received info about yet.
I I'm not sure that we are. Like we've identified about 150 partners across the country, various different kinds of groups, and I'm not sure how prominent woodlot owners are in that cohort or that group. But at the same time, I do remember that, you know, it was literally 2 or 3 days before the lockdown in March of last year, where the government brought together stakeholders from across the country to have a conversation about how to move forward the 2 billion tree initiative. And it was the last kind of face-to-face gathering that I attended. And there was someone there from the National Woodlot Owners Association, and I have a memory that she was from Nova Scotia. And she was also the president of the Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners Association. So I may be wrong on that, but there's probably, so that's another opportunity for folks like you to basically go to the association and say, you know, I can't plant 5,000 trees on my property, but is the Woodlot Association approaching the federal government about how you can play a role in helping get 20,000 trees planted across 200 properties?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Got a question from Joanne here that I see. She's asking, Graham, how do you see the federal government's policy initiatives around climate change versus support for things like oil and gas sector / pipelines? From your Ottawa perspective, which side is likely to prevail, and how can we best support the progressive climate change pieces while still being forthright about the damage done by buying a pipeline, etc.?
Yeah, I would say that the cognitive dissonance that that you're sort of picking up on, or you're referencing here, about the fact that the government, like somehow this federal government has been able to unapologetically and unambiguously message the fact that they care about climate change and they're ready to invest in climate action and they want to see progress on climate change move forward on the one hand, and on the other hand, buy pipelines and other things like that. And so there's no question that I completely agree that there's this cognitive dissonance within the within the federal government on that issue. But I do think it's also fair to say that, you know, this is the first government in Canadian history that has clearly been willing to fight more than one election on a commitment to make progress on climate change. That has come into power and then significantly increased its level of ambition, has managed to put in place and then defend the carbon tax and suggest an increase in it over time, has helped us work through the constitutional questions associated with it, and has most recently increased its level of ambition when it comes to our targets over the next decade, and has made some real investments in recent federal budgets. And it's not enough. What we clearly have to do is we have to have some clarity that if we want to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, or zero greenhouse gas emissions or more by negative greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, we're essentially involved in a project of phasing out fossil fuels over the next 30 years. You know, with some exceptions, but that's more or less the single most important thing we have to do. We need the government to be clearer in messaging around that, and to not do the kinds of contradictory things that you're mentioning. And I think there's nothing in terms of what you can do. I would argue that nature groups, as I say, can get more involved in the climate change conversation, and you can make sure that your elected leaders are hearing from you and participate in organizing around making sure that MPs know that you expect to see action.
Thank you. Also, a question from Karen here is wondering if you could speak to Any Nature Canada successes around working with municipalities on biodiversity conservation or nature-based climate solutions?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, first of all, the nature-based climate solutions piece is really new, right? I'm not saying, and what's interesting about nature-based climate solutions is that most of the activities involved in nature-based climate solutions are not at all new. Right? The notion of restoring wetlands or protecting a forest from being cut down or planting trees, or these are things that the nature community has been doing for a very long time. We've known about the value of natural infrastructure in municipal areas, both for their biodiversity and nature benefits, but also for their ability to help address severe weather events like flooding. So what we need to do in order to advance nature-based climate solutions aren't particularly new, but the fact that we're now also asking the question, how do we quantify the greenhouse gas emission benefits from these kinds of investments and activities? And how do we value that? And the fact that we're now we're able to draw on some of the political commitment around climate change to leverage more investments in nature is relatively new. So we're still at an early stage. We have developed a toolkit, which you'll find on our website, which walks through the various different dimensions of nature-based climate solutions and provides direction to where you can find more information and who some of the additional expertise is. We've been holding webinars to talk about the concepts. We, as I said earlier, we did have a plan to do a deep dive with organizations or coalitions in 7 representative ecosystems across the country, including the coastal Atlantic Canada with Nature Nova Scotia, that unfortunately wasn't able to move forward. And in 1 or 2 cases, we are beginning the process of working more closely with local nature groups who are asking, or in coalitions like in Lanark County, Ontario, who are asking the question, okay, how do we operationalize nature-based climate solutions in our county? But with the exception of the stuff that you can already point to in terms of the pre-existing commitments around reforestation or natural infrastructure, we really don't have many good examples at a municipal level right now in terms of municipalities developing nature-based climate solution strategies that advance both the nature agenda and the climate agenda simultaneously and are integrated well into the climate change activities, or into the broader climate change strategy. So that's kind of an exciting place to be, because it means that if you're someone who cares about nature and someone who cares about climate change, then there's an opportunity for you to help get your municipality to think about how this unfolds. You will find in our toolkit examples in municipalities across the country of municipalities that are taking action on individual dimensions of nature-based climate solutions. But I'm not sure we have enough good examples of municipalities that have said, here is the nature-based climate solution dimension of our broader climate strategy. And that's really the next front. As I say, there's no reason why every municipality across the country that currently has a climate change strategy shouldn't also have an explicit nature-based climate solutions dimension of that within the next few years. So that's kind of the ground up revolution that's happening right now, hopefully.
Yeah, as probably at least some folks within our audience tonight might know, that there are climate change plans for municipalities across the province, but there isn't a nature-based component to most, possibly any of them. I could be wrong about that. I am seeing a comment from Bob here, from a different Bob, to that effect. He's asking, are you able to interact with elected officials at the municipal level to encourage local engagement, possibly union of Nova Scotia municipalities? Halifax told me they do not have the staff to plant a minimum of 5,000 trees. End of story. So what would your advice be, I guess, if we're trying to reach out to our municipalities saying, here's a goal, how do we get moving on this when yeah, there isn't an existing mandate.
Yeah, I mean, I that's kind of a political question associated with the composition of the Halifax City Council and other kinds of councils. It surprises me that a city like Halifax doesn't think it has the capacity to plant 5,000 trees. I mean, we're not talking about calipers here, right? We're not talking about 5,000 trees that are already several years old, and you need a tractor to dig the hole and to bring the tree in for your local park. Many in the Ottawa area, there are conservation authorities that routinely plant thousands of trees in fields. And so that sounds to me like a forestry section of the Halifax city government that needs some beefing up. And it feels to me like the question, we're trying to plant these 2 billion trees across the country, and the government of Halifax is saying it can't participate in that because it can't figure out how to plant trees, would seem to be an unacceptable response from a fair number of Haligonians. We are able to engage municipalities directly. And if a and we are, in fact, when I mentioned, we've already, we've had 150 odd or 100 odd institutions already come forward and say, yeah, we're interested in being part of a conversation with you about how as a collective, we can move this forward. There are specific municipalities involved. And I actually mentioned one in my presentation from Nova Scotia. And so maybe there's something that can be learned from that jurisdiction. I mean, for the most part, though, the way we see our responsibility in terms of government relations is federal. We have built up a team of policy experts who are able to engage the federal government and understand the federal government. But the biggest team in Nature Canada is the Nature Network team, because we are, as I said earlier, strongly committed to working with and supporting local nature groups. So I think the question of how we would approach municipalities for the most part is we would work with groups on the ground that want to have a conversation about how to move their municipality, and we would see those groups as the leaders in moving any individual municipality. But we may be able to help with that, and we'd be interested if people want to contact us. You can write to info@naturecanada.ca. I'd encourage everyone to please go and just sign up to receive our emails as well on our website. And then for each one of the programs I mentioned, Naturehood, 2 billion trees, nature-based climate solutions, protected areas, bird-friendly cities, we have a staff person in our Nature Network team that is tasked with working with local nature groups. So we can establish that contact directly.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so if anyone out there is interested in engaging more with your municipality, let us know how we can help, either us at Nature Nova Scotia or directly to Nature Canada. Resources and partnerships there to be made. Bob, did you have, or Burkhard, did you have any other questions or thoughts for us? I don't want you guys to feel left out. I wanted to go through a few of our chat questions here first, though.
Well, I guess I'm just a big B, but I want to thank you, Graham, for your questions there. I see David Patrickin has a very interesting point about 2 billion trees and whether this is compatible with cutting down old growth, which is something that they keep chronically doing even on public land here in order to fire up boilers to produce electricity.
Yeah.
And basically what we've got here, I think. I don't know whether you care to comment on it or not, Graham, but I agree with David that are basically we've put the foxes in charge of the chicken coop. That's one of the things I coined years ago here, and it's unfortunate that when I was working with fisheries, I'll just use another analogy. I was at one point with the fisheries and inland fisheries and agriculture, and basically I was being paid to work with various river associations to restore riverine habitat and shorelines and repair. Basically, we came up with. I was involved with the Adopt-A Stream that Amy Weston is involved with now, and at the same time, the same Department of Agriculture was paying farmers to destroy fish habitat. And so what we've got, and that's the analogy I would use to step outside David Patrickens, is that we've got one arm of the forestry industry. Old growth is wonderful for them. It's the kind of stuff they'd like to cut all the time. And when they find it, they hope that nobody else sees it, and they just go do it. And here we are with another group that wants to restore things. And you know what my biggest problem is with the restoration work I've done is wildlife eating them. It cost me more than $300 a roll to buy welded wire steel mesh that's 4 feet high. And if you don't tack it to the tree or stake it down, the beavers just lift it up.
Yeah, I can't solve beavers. That's for sure. Bring them back. Yeah, I mean, this is actually an issue I didn't get into very much in my presentation. The question of what are the most effective nature-based climate solutions, right? And especially if we're thinking about it on a reasonable timeline. I mean, you can't, like, in reality, from a climate change perspective, the 2 billion tree program isn't actually going to be a big part of the solution for the next decade. Now, those trees then as they begin to grow more, they begin to absorb more carbon. But we have this sort of situation in Canada right now, I think, where the logging industry, in cooperation with the forestry departments of different governments, have created a kind of a series of myths associated with the impact of logging as it pertains to climate change, through talking about things like harvested wood products and the storage of carbon in harvested wood products, and by arguing that, you know, there is no deforestation because they replant. And I think we know that if you cut down a 200-year-old tree and you replant it with a bunch of saplings, now that may not be deforestation in the technical context of the forestry industry, but you've clearly changed the composition of life in that area, as well as had a meaningful impact on carbon. We think the government and the logging industry is systematically underestimating the degree to which it is actually, through its deforestation or through its logging, for reasons I just explained, they may not call it deforestation, through its logging, is underestimating its impact on climate change. And of course, we think that there are a lot of reasons to protect old growth forests that have nothing to do with climate change, because it's life. And so what we're trying to do is we're working with consultants and policy analysts to critically analyze the carbon accounting system that the federal government has. And we have found questionable assumptions that are in the neighborhood of 80 megatons. And to give you an example, the assumption is that the coal industry represents about 47 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions now in Canada every year. And we think there are decisions being made within the context of how we calculate carbon, greenhouse gas emissions from deforestation that are in like the 80 megaton category. So it's huge. And so we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that the full price of logging from a climate change perspective is better understood, and the value of protecting intact ecosystems, especially old growth forests, is understood from a climate change perspective. Like, the easiest thing we can do if we want nature to play a role in helping address climate change from a greenhouse gas emission perspective, from a carbon perspective, it's to not destroy old growth forests. It's to not destroy peatlands and wetlands, and to not destroy remaining grasslands. And that's where we should be starting. But the good news is we've got this, monumental commitment of 30% by 2030. So let's see that operationalized, and we can hopefully make some progress on that. But restoration is inevitably going to be part of the solution, because so much of our habitat in Canada is already too degraded. So we got to do both, right? If the climate crises that we face, or if the environmental crises that we face can be characterized as death by 1,000 cuts, then we need to use spears from all sides in order to address it.
We have a comment from Donna here asking also about the 2 billion tree program. And if we can ask the federal government collectively, I suppose, to include accompanying messages to retain existing forest cover whenever possible, as well as to provide assistance for things like browse protection, to accompany the planting through things like temporary fencing. So that's something that you could correct me, Graham, I think is included in your project costs under the 2 billion tree program, is any accessory activities you need to do to protect your work. But what about that point around messaging to retain existing forest cover?
Yeah, I mean, there was that question earlier about the cognitive dissonance, the disconnect within the federal government as it pertains to energy policy. And to some degree, that disconnect exists in the federal government as it pertains to forests as well, right? On the one hand, you have Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the federal government as a whole has made this commitment to expand protected areas to 30% of Canada's land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030. And that represents an opportunity to protect vast swaths of forest. And I think the federal government, in that kind of manner, would be saying that they are in fact arguing that we need to protect existing forests as we begin to restore them. And then on the other hand, they're making investments in, and then at the same time, they're making investments in the 2 billion tree initiative. But then on the other hand, there are these battles going on across Canada associated with the deference that Natural Resources Canada shows to the logging industry, or that individual governments show to the logging industry. The battles going on in Nova Scotia were referenced earlier, but you see the same thing happening and spilling out at a very large scale right now in British Columbia. In Quebec, the Cree Nation government, which has a very large traditional territory in central and northern Quebec, has a goal, wants to protect 30% of its land, and put forward a plan and said, these are all areas that we want to see protected. And so far, the vast majority of the agreement with the Quebec government in terms of expansion of protected areas in Cree Nation government territory is happening north of the logging line. So if you're trying to protect a forest north of the logging line in Quebec, it's going to be a lot easier than if you're trying to protect it south of the logging line. But there is an uproar in Quebec around this. The people in Quebec have noticed this pattern and have realized that the Quebec government is showing a completely undue level of deference to the logging industry. So hopefully we can make progress on that. But I completely agree with the idea that more needs to be done to message the importance of retaining existing forest cover. And I'll take that back to our 2 billion trees team to make sure that's part of kind of what we're saying in terms of the right trees in the right places for the right reasons.
Yeah, our follow-up comment there is that apart from protected area forests, our working forests need to be managed with retention of forest cover so that soils do not emit carbon, which is also a good point, Anna. Thank you.
Yeah, there's so many ways we could be doing a better job of managing our forest.
Yeah, so we're in kind of a funny position in Nova Scotia, I suppose, where we have so many private landowners here, but our parcels are relatively small, and there are many private landowners who are already doing a lot of these activities that would move us forward in this area. But then we also have crown lands, which in many areas are managed very differently. So that this is a big topic within nature-based climate solutions for sure.
Yeah.
So to go back to your earlier suggestion or point there, Graham, about our local associations. So if there's anybody with us tonight who's a member of your local woodlot association, and you can tell us more about that, please do. But if you want to take any of this feedback back to your leadership over there, that would be great. Yeah, and get back to us about that. So 8:15 here, Bob and Burkhard. We don't have any more questions in our chat here. Is there anything you wanted to follow up with on any of these subjects before we move on to the plan for the weekend?
There's endless things to talk about, but I think Graham has done a good job of hitting, and I do want to think that the 2 billion tree program, I've been talking with Graham's staff quite a bit about it, and we did try, they did try, we gave feedback, and they tried to amend some of the aspects of just creating plantations. And basically there was pushback from the federal government on that. So I'm quite impressed with the staff that Graham has and their ability for their younger years to have the insights that are necessary to make wise decisions. And some of the things we worry about when I talk to kids that are 30 years old, they wind up with some amazingly perceptive responses. And you feel like you're an old fogey who's basically not expecting to pass on a little wisdom, and they've already acquired it. So that puts, I think, Nature Canada in a great position to have the staff that you do. And we worry about things that perhaps when I push them forward, I find out that the aspects already been covered, which is
well, if only people 18 to 35 could vote, we would have a far more progressive environmental government than we do today. So there's the youth are the future, and so far the polling looks pretty positive in that respect.
Let's hope they vote.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for inviting me, and thank you for all of your great work. Yeah, I will say good luck with the AGM over the next few days, and really look forward to continuing to work with as many of you as possible, and have just appreciated the relationships we have in Nova Scotia in so many ways.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Graham. We'll just go through our schedule really quickly here, folks, as Graham signs out there. So you know what to expect for the rest of the weekend. Give me just a sec here while I share my screen. If it's your first celebration and you're not familiar with our format, so as Bob mentioned at the beginning, traditionally this would be our evening social at a weekend-long event at a lodge or some lovely place somewhere in Nova Scotia. Can you guys see the heron here or the schedule?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so that was tonight. Tomorrow and Sunday would be dedicated to our presentations. The timing's a little bit different this year. Normally we would have had presentations first thing, and then we would have gone out for an afternoon, maybe some evenings as well, of guided hikes and other excursions. And we definitely encourage you to get out on your own. We have some resources for you this year, but of course we aren't able to gather in person. So tomorrow morning, we're going to start our presentations slightly earlier than we would in past years. We're going to open up with the State of Nova Scotia's urban birds. So this will be a chat with our newly formed Bird-Friendly Halifax Coalition. So we'll have a couple presentations there from members of that group to give you an idea of what's going on with birds around, it's called urban birds, but around the HRM in general, which is sometimes not a very urban place. We also have the youth program going on tomorrow. So both mornings of the weekend, you can access the youth program for free. It's live streamed to the Young Naturalist Club's YouTube page, and we'll make sure that there are links available for that as well. So we're starting off tomorrow also with a bird, Super Smart Starlings with Maheshi Dharmasiri. We're going to move from there into the urban forest and then mosses and lichens for the kids. And then we'll move on to a break for guided hikes. So that'll be an opportunity for you to explore some of the resources we have available to you, or if you already have a hike in mind that you're going to do between presentations, let us know. It'd be nice to share where folks are going. And then we're going to move into our evening presentations. So Maheshi is going to move over from the youth program and join us pseudo grown-ups, I guess, adult nature nerds, for a presentation on her starling research. Then we're going to learn some about mosses and lichens. We're going to learn about ticks, and we'll talk about the new Nova Scotia Herp Atlas. So lots of exciting stuff for tomorrow. I won't go into the schedule for the next day. We can go over that tomorrow. If you're looking for the youth program, first thing tomorrow morning, this is where you're going to find it. So you can go right over to the Young Naturalist Club's YouTube page. I will link that to our socials after we wrap up here. But this is how you can find us, and this is what the main screen looks like. So if you get lost, this is what you're looking for. You've already been in a Zoom webinar, so hopefully you're comfortable with your controls there, but this is a general overview of what we're going to be looking at. This will be more important around the AGM, where if you're attending the AGMs or members, you'll need to vote or potentially comment on things. So you want to be familiar with the controls there if you're not already. And for after tomorrow morning, or if you're going straight out for a hike or birding or something tomorrow, and you want to check out those resources right away, they are up on our website. So head on over to Nature Nova Scotia, and it's this first blog post there. There's a bunch of resources linked within. Yeah, and that's it from me. I'll hand the floor back over to Bob and Burkhard.
Well, Donna's complaining about there's no wine, and I'm sorry we can't deal with that. Things would really degrade quickly if we did have wine. Probably at this point, after all this starvation and of social isolation. Anyway, I think that Graham gave a pretty good talk. I kind of like the thoughts, and it's an honor to be associated with Nature Canada. So I'm very pleased. I look forward to the rest of the weekend, and I don't think I need to say a whole lot more. There's lots more to talk about if anybody has questions, but there's no sense in going on about what we've been doing just haphazardly at this point. I will get a chance to talk about, excuse me, species at risk on Sunday evening. So I'll save that story for then.
All right, well, I guess with that, we can wrap up then. I see folks are already talking about what they're drinking tonight. We should ask folks in a poll maybe tomorrow night what they've started off with.
It's going downhill fast, Becky.
All right, folks. Well, we'll let you go, and we'll see you first thing tomorrow morning if you're joining us for our first presentation. Thank you, Bob and Burkhard, for being here, opening for us.
Thank you for being such a good host.
Oh. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks and good night.
Good night. Bye.